This episode is brought to you by Adaptive, the software for builders that automates draws, budgets, and bookkeeping with AI. For over a year now, I've been partnered with Adaptive, and they've just been an amazing game changer in terms of efficiency in our time and all our bookkeeping. From the time we get an invoice, we import it into their system. The AI codes it, cost codes it, job codes it. All we have to do is review it, pass it through the people internally in the office, all digitally, and then it gets approved and paid all via ACH. It's becoming extremely fast and saving us countless hours a day and a week. When it comes to draws, all of our budgets now are set in Adaptive as well. So now when we cost code against the draws, we can do our change orders, and then with a click of a button, we can submit these draws to our title companies or to our homeowners for faster payment. If you're looking to save time, and if you're looking to be accurate, I highly recommend Adaptive. Additionally, if you'd like to listen to one of their founders share the story of Adaptive, you can listen to episode number 15 on the Curious Builder podcast. If you're here local in Minnesota and want to network with other builders, we have the Curious Builder Collective. You can head to our website to find out what that is all about. We have 3 more 3-hour sessions coming up this year. We're basically a small group that has a room for 10 more builders. We currently have 20. We're going to cap it at 30. This is a way to test your theories, learn from each other, and elevate your brand and your business. Head to thecuriousbuilderpodcast.com to find out more about the Curious Builder Collective. Today on the podcast, we had Jackson Strom from Strom Architecture. We had a great interview. It was really nice to just chat with him. He's out of North Dakota and, sister city here to Minneapolis, West Fargo area. And I really talked to him a lot about the operational side of running an architecture firm. We've had architects on before, but I haven't really gone down that line of talking before. And it was just a great open conversation, a lot about communication, really just talking about how you assemble your team and making sure that everyone is communicating clearly with each other and with the clients. So without further ado, here's Jackson Strom with Strom Architecture. Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. Today I'm joined with Jackson Strom from Strom Architecture. Welcome, Jackson.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You're based in North Dakota, right? Up in Fargo?
Yeah, we're in West Fargo, so not much difference between Fargo and West Fargo, but yeah, our office is actually in West Fargo. So
West Fargo sounds super fancy. For those that aren't from the upper Midwest that don't know Fargo, West Fargo is like the Martha's Vineyard of Fargo.
You're right.
Well, you had reached out to me actually quite a while ago, maybe 6 months to a year ago, mainly to put yourself on my radar. As a custom home builder, I knew you were starting to do some stuff down here on Lake Minnetonka. And so we kind of played phone tag back and forth. We've had a few Zoom calls, and I just thought I always like having people on the podcast to dive into their businesses. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, your journey into architecture and your firm, Strom Architecture, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. That's kind of a loaded question, but I mean, if we want to go back a ways, I went to NDSU, came up here from South Dakota, been in Fargo ever since. Started working at a firm probably 3rd year in architecture school, and I worked there for 6 years, kind of focusing on doing a little bit of everything. But that firm did focus on custom residential work, so I had the opportunity to work on some really high-end homes with that principal. And then from there, joined another local firm, was with them for another 6 years. And then probably almost 5 years ago, jumped off and we started our own firm. And now Strom Architecture, we're focusing on, I'd say 85% custom residential, 15% kind of more boutique commercial. I think there's a group of 7 of us now. And yeah, primarily focusing in, about 300 miles, any direction of Fargo. So we have a few projects down in Sioux Falls, Bismarck, Grand Forks, Minneapolis. We've had a project down in Iowa, one over in Montana. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I'm sure you have plenty of questions you can ask regarding that.
Well, yeah, I sure do. Out of curiosity, what part of Montana is the home that you designed?
It is, gosh, it's a few years back now for a friend of ours. It was, what is the lake out there?
Flathead?
Yeah, it's not on Flathead, but it's up the hill from Flathead. So there's a view to Flathead from it.
Sure.
So,
I always ask because we had a cabin up that way for
oh,
25 years, and so I know Northwest Montana pretty good. In fact, the reason I know it's 4 hours exactly, to Fargo is because we would always stop at a friend's house on the way there, because it was usually 18 hours if you were breaking the speed limit the entire way, to our cabin in Montana, but we would always fuel up and grab a bite to eat in Fargo, so,
yeah. Well, that
uh
sounds like a good place to have a cabin at.
yeah, it was good. Other than it was 1,200 miles away, it was
Right.
great.
True, true.
Well, back to you. I was doing a little research on you. In your youth, you said I think your dad built homes, and you were pouring concrete at an early age. What was it about architecture that drew you in school, and not being a general contractor, being a builder? Because it seems like kind of you were primed to maybe be in building, on the physical side of things.
Yeah, I mean, so growing up, Mark, we grew up on a farm in South Dakota. So kind of in the middle of summer when, there's not much to do on the farm, my dad had built some homes in the past. So we did end up building a few spec homes, kind of as a summer, job while we're not in the field. So, but it was kind of just something that at the time, just something that we were doing. I didn't think much of it. Just like, oh, that's what we're doing for work today. And then as I got older in high school, I worked for a guy who poured concrete in town there for I think 2 or 3 summers. But again, at that time, it was kind of a thing where I was like, oh, working hard, this is great, and making money and just getting good experience. But even during that time, I think back to it sometimes now, and I'm like, I probably should have been paying more attention sometimes, or there's certain details I look at now and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember doing that. And but at the time, I didn't know I was going to be an architect someday. To be honest, it was senior year in high school, and my guidance counselor said, she's like, well, you always been interested in drawing and art, and which I always had been growing up, always drawing here and there, but never homes, just drawing, I don't know, Michael Jordan or basketball shoes or anything of that nature. And so she's like, have you ever thought about architecture? And I was like, yeah, I suppose I could do that. And so it's kind of like, well, where's the nearest architecture school? Is either U of M or NDSU, and NDSU was a little bit closer. So that's where I ended up. And I just really fell in love with it from there. So
Interesting. What did
yeah.
when you were? How did you know it was the right time to start your own firm?
Um, I think growing up, that's a good question. I think growing up on the farm, just watching my dad kind of, essentially run his own business, I just always had it in the back of my head that I wanted to be doing my own thing at some point. Um, and then so upon really, I think the catalyst was we were having our first child, and I was studying for my tests, and I said to myself, I need to get these tests done, before our first son comes. And then within, I think, months of passing all the exams and getting licensed, I had jumped off and started our own thing. But I think it was something always in the back of my head. Um, but yeah, it was just kind of like, I better get this started
I mean,
before
that
I
makes total sense. Have a baby and start a business. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
makes total
yeah.
sense.
Then
Uh,
there's the pandemic, and then all these different things that kind
yeah.
of dominoes after that. But
What did you have a client already? I mean, it seems like, at least like in building, if you're going to start, you might start with a remodel, and a friend, or a family member, or you have a skill and you sort of develop it that way. Or in the way that the path that I chose is, I borrowed money and I built a spec home and sold it. And after you do that a few times, then you have a reputation and you can kind of play it that way. How does one start their own firm? Do you have a few jobs sort of already in the wings? Do you already have some clientele?
yeah.
Or you just hang a shingle on the outside of your office, as you will, and say, "Hey, we're open for business," and try to drum some up.
I think a little bit of all the above. So that's something I didn't touch on. But so when I was still at my first firm, right out of college, actually during college, I was doing a few little projects here and there. So I do a addition for my parents' home. I did an addition for my aunt's house. I did a new house for a family in our hometown. Um, so then all throughout, well, two things. There was one kind of a modern lake cabin that I ended up having the opportunity to work on with my dad's farming partner. And that gained a lot of attention back in South Dakota. So it was kind of like, hey, that's the modern cabin on this lake. And so even once I got to my second firm, there was people that came to us because they knew of that modern cabin. So I always, I guess, in hindsight, had that entrepreneurial bug of like, hey, I want to spend extra time after work doing my own thing, and I want to, always be trying to rustle up business, whether it's for the firm I was at or if there was a possibility of us doing a side project. Um, and I would probably give a lot of credit, for better or worse, to my first boss for allowing me to do some side projects. And I probably just got my feet wet there. And then upon wanting to start my own thing, kind of kicking a lot of tires in the sense of like, whether it's talking to different builders that I had a good relationship with or different clients, just saying, hey, thinking about maybe doing this. What's your guys' take on this? Is there an appetite for another residential architect in our area? And just getting that conversation going a little bit. And it was just really not surprising, but it was, yeah, let's just say surprising how many people wanted to help you. Like, oh, well,
Yeah.
we would have projects for you. We got a new client coming down the pipeline that you could probably work on them with. And because of course, keep in mind, a lot of these builders, I was working with them continuous, on a regular basis at the firm I was at, kind of running, doing the design and the documents and all those things. So they were already familiar with me. So
Did that create friction when you left with your previous employer?
Um, probably a little bit. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, anytime there's a new, you're kind of playing the same game. So yeah.
So your
Um,
competition, I mean, do you guys compete against each other now? Are they still there?
yep. Yep.
Yeah.
They're competition now. Yeah.
Okay.
It was, I had a great experience there, but it was literally a thing where I had it in my head, like, this is a move I'm going to make. And regardless what is said or offered to me, I just gotta do this. So,
Do
mhm.
non-competes, make their way around in the architecture world? I mean, when you hire somebody, is that a thing? Or is that, I mean, like in corporate America, sometimes you'll have, a non-compete. I know in building, we really don't. I mean, it's not like, or at least not that I'm aware of, where you would have, let's say, a non-compete with one of your project managers to go, because you hear about that sometimes where a project manager will break off and, start their own building company and the subs. And, they'd obviously be able to say, well, hey, I worked on Mark Williams Custom Homes or whichever builder. And so they would get some cachet of saying, well, yeah, I was the project manager that sort of built that. But there
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be any sort of non-compete with that. Is that similar to the architecture world?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of non-competes in the architectural world, but it wasn't an instance for myself. No. Mm-mm. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Have you ever, one of the questions that I was going to ask you, and I think it's appropriate to ask you now, why is it that you see, you had a background of seeing your dad building and being, fairly handy by the sounds of it. Why do
Mm.
we see so few architects that are also builders? We do see building firms, and it's very rare that, that someone obviously can do everything. That's
Yeah.
a pretty unique person, but it
Mhm.
seems more common that you might have a building firm of like 7 to 10 people, a couple project managers, and maybe bring, interior design would be usually the first step. But I
Yep.
know several of my peers that are that have architectural design in house, and maybe they're not a full blown architect, maybe they're a home designer or a draftsman, but
Mhm.
they sort of use that as a competitive advantage. Why? And we can talk about that later, but why is it that it doesn't seem that there's very many architects that have like a GC or like a builder under their umbrella? Any thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that, Mark, are that I mean, it's hard enough, in my opinion, in my experience, it's hard enough running an architecture firm and kind of saying, hey, we're really good at what we do here, let alone putting another hat on and saying, oh yeah, we're really good at that too,
Yeah, I mean,
So
I agree with you. I'm just wondering why builders are dumb enough to do it.
well, I think I don't want to say too much to that, but I do think sometimes there's I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's sometimes what I experience is builders say, well, we'll save you some money. You don't need to go to that architect. We can handle that in house, and that's something that we contend with quite often. Um, you get questions from clients saying, well, hey, they said they could do that in house for a fraction of what you're kind of proposing your fee to be. Why is that more economical. And I think it's just a different experience,
Mhm.
Um,
I would agree with you. I mean, the ones that I'm thinking of, I don't think any of them are full architects. I think usually they would be draftsmen, and there's nothing wrong with that. For
mhm.
those that, I mean, maybe you could give a quick. We had David Charles on, I think episode like 6, and he was a home designer. He talked a little bit about it, but it's been 55 episodes since then, so we're
Yeah.
probably good for what you want to just give the audience a quick, in your own words, what is the difference of architecture? You've got architects, home designers, and draftsmen. How would you describe them if you were describing it to somebody who didn't know the difference?
I've been asked that question before, Mark, and I probably don't have the best answer, but I think a lot of it is, well, just nuts and bolts of it. Architects, the training, the experience, the testing you have to go through, continuing education. Keep in mind, there's a lot of clients that don't see you know, they don't, that doesn't matter to them as much. So I think that's something, and I'm kind of going around your question a little bit, but I will say that's something that we contend with is a lot of times clients are looking at the end, the service cost. And that's the main thing they're concerned about sometimes. So when we see clients that ended up going with whether it's like the lumberyard, a home designer, or just a unlicensed architect, or which I guess would not be considered an architect, that's the biggest thing for them is, well, their rate was half of yours. So
Yeah, I
that's
mean, the way I've had it explained to me before is, I mean, it's a little bit like a doctor. You've got, a nurse, and then maybe like a medical aide in terms of like a lot of it is schooling, right? I mean, so
mhm,
if you're going to be an architect, you have your license, maybe kind of that mid-tier home designer is either on their path to becoming an architect, or maybe somewhere along the schooling they decided that, especially in the residential world, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the architects I've spoken to, a lot of the architecture programs really center around commercial architecture.
yep,
Is that accurate?
correct, yep,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
And yet it's interesting because it seems like architects, um, well, like the awards, I mean, a lot of the awards are centered around commercial architecture, and
Mhm.
I think it's only recently changing. And correct me if I'm wrong, because this is your field more so than mine. But I think people are now in the architecture world really starting to celebrate all that is being done in home design architects. Because it almost seems like I haven't had a commercial architect on, but I'd be kind of curious to see like if they have sort of an attitude against like, oh, you're a residential architect. Well, I'm a commercial architect. I mean, does that exist? I have no idea, but
I mean, there's a lot of ego in our profession. Yeah,
okay,
I think that exists. I
okay.
mean, I will say that even students coming out of school, you hear that quite often of like, oh, they're not interested in residential architecture, or oh, they are interested in residential architecture, so they're interested in pursuing your firm, or that's usually that thing of like some students just residential architecture is almost like that's just not their cup of tea. So
It's not their jam. I
yep.
noticed it. I mean, speaking of NDSU, and I looked at your staff. I mean, you've got a pretty big staff, and they look extremely young, which I'm excited about. We hear all the time,
Yeah.
that hey, the trades and those in building and construction are so old and long in the tooth and silver haired that we're gonna have no future. And yet, I look around and I think the future is really bright. I think there's
Mhm.
a lot of opportunity, and people aren't wrong in saying that a lot of people are leaving, but that just means that there's a lot of opportunity for those that are here and those that want to start a business or own a business or buy a business. I think if
Right.
I could do it over again, I think I would maybe buy a business or buy a builder that already has it all figured out versus, trying to create something from scratch. But why don't you tell me a little bit about your experience? I mean, you seem like you heavily recruit out of the school that you graduated from. I
Mhm.
assume that's by design. Is it because they're local? You can kind of get them into an internship path, and then if it sort of seems like it would work out, then you hire them. But why don't you tell me a little bit about how you find your talent and how you retain them?
Yeah, yeah. I definitely like to say there was some big game plan behind that, but it grew quite organically. I think we started out with one intern from NDSU, and then it was kind of a deal where, well, she said that her other friend was looking for a position, so then you had two interns. Well, then one graduates. Well, do you want to start full time? And then just kind of this trickle down effect, and And then actually, we also have, so in addition to the NDSU crew, we have a team member that works out of south of Minneapolis as well, remotely. So, um, but yeah, we don't necessarily have any big recruitment plan, but it's kind of, we've been fortunate to have some of the, I'd say, better students at NDSU. And so they're very aware of, other students that excel at what they're doing, and
Right.
usually they kind of bring them in the door, and so just kind of grown organically that way.
How big would a graduating class of, let's say, NDSU architecture class be per year?
Geez, Mark, I should know that question. I should know that answer. I think it's probably, is it, yeah, 60, 80, something like
Okay.
that.
I mean, that's actually a pretty high number, I think. I mean, that's quite a
Yeah.
few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's 40, 60, but it's somewhere around there.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, it's good. I was just curious how many are coming into the market. It'd be really, you probably don't know the answer to this, but it'd be really interesting to know how many stay. I know, for instance, I don't know, is it hard to get into architecture school? I'm just relating it to the medical field, like the whole, I don't know if you know much about like matching, in terms of like, the medical schools, and they very much limit supply and demand a bit. And
Mhm.
so they create, a higher salary base for, by kind of hoarding the brains, if you will, by making it hard to get into medical school.
Yeah.
And is that a similar style that happens in architecture or not really?
It's definitely not quite to the medical school, but yeah, it's not, everybody doesn't get past that first year. You kind of got to be, I can't remember what percentage of your class, but you got to have a certain GPA to kind of get into that second year and really start that program. So NDSU, it's a 5-year program, where like U of M, it's a 6-year program.
Okay.
So that was also one of the reasons why I guess NDSU seemed more appealing to me, because it
You
was,
could get you could get to work faster.
yeah, right. You get your master's in both, but one it's 5 years, others it's 6 years.
What is it, just like you had reached out to me, and whether it's the profile of the homes or you're just more interested in, obviously Minneapolis is a bigger city than Fargo, or West Fargo, I should say. And, are you finding you're having success in reaching out to builders here in the metro area, or walk us through kind of what's working and what's not working, over the last couple of years as you try to expand your brand and your architecture services to, let's call it, west and northwest Minnesota, which is
Mhm.
southeast of Fargo.
Yeah, I'd say I think I would argue it has been successful. I mean, it kind of started with a lot of just cold emailing. I don't exactly remember what the email was to yourself, but a lot of times it's, kind of creating a packet of our work, documenting our process a little bit, and saying, "Hey, would love to chat a little bit if opportunity arises."
Oh,
And
I thought I was special. I didn't realize you were going alphabetical, and you finally got to W, which is Williams, and you just hit send.
yeah, you had to throw that out there, Mark. Yeah. So,
Hey, there's no shame in that game. I like a good sales
well,
strategy.
but
So
here's the thing. I mean, I'd like to say that. I mean, just watching from a distance, I mean, you see what groups are kind of
yeah.
like doing really nice homes in Minneapolis, and yours is one of them. So it's kind of um, it was surprising how many, those cold emails, how many different people over the years have kind of said, yeah, let's hop on a phone call, or let's get coffee, or so I think some of my colleagues, when I first told them that we were doing that, sometimes they're like, well, why would anybody pick up the phone for that? And it's just been surprising how many people do.
I
So
mean, I think it's time and chance. You just don't know where a
yeah.
builder's at. Maybe there's had a. It's not. It's honestly no different than plumbing, mechanical, trimming, painting. It's everything, And we get called on a lot. Specifically, seems like by painters for whatever reason. Or either that, or they think I really need a lot of painting help, which could be. But I guess the point I'm making is that I'm fine with getting reached out to, and I heard the best sales line I've ever heard. Where it was from somebody else. And I said, well, we have, let's say my cabinet guy, I've been with him for 12, 15 years now. And the cabinet shop said, I'm not trying to replace your loyalty, because I hope to make you that loyal to me.
Mhm.
I want to be your number one plan B, or I want to be, 1A. or sorry, 1B. And so like, if there's a change, and so it's kind of this long-term relationship game. And I think a lot of builders, once we get comfortable and once we have something that represents our brand really well, we're not going to want to rock the boat. And I think architecture, which makes it sort of unique, is certain architects do get known for different styles.
Mhm.
And so I think, sometimes a big part of our job as a builder is sort of playing matchmaker with the personalities that are involved. And you have the homeowner, obviously, you have their style and their personality. You potentially have an interior designer and an architecture problem, or architecture problem, architecture partner, not problem. And so really, I feel like a big part of my job is just understanding like how I feel like a general manager of a team. Like I'm
Mhm.
really responsible for assembling the team to be successful.
Yep.
And not even if an architect does phenomenal work, they might not be the right fit for the client. And
Mhm.
so I think for myself personally, there's probably 5 to 8 architects I stay pretty in contact with on a regular basis. And I would say 3 of them I've never even worked with before. And it's just
Mhm.
more like when the right client comes along, I have developed a relationship where I'm like, I think they'd be someone that we should interview. And,
Right.
it's a long-term, play. And so anyway, I guess where I'm going with this is I can see why builders would respond to you, because I suspect I'm not alone in that category, that, it's not like you just have one architecture or one design partner and that's the only person you ever use.
Right. And I mean, like you said a mouthful in the sense that once that, I think for us, we kind of look at it like, yeah, we're not option A, but once that opportunity arises, we'd love to throw our hat in the ring if there's kind of discussion of like, hey, what are the other options? And I think back, Mark, even when I got my first job out of college or in college, I've just always been maybe um, just a little forward in the sense like I remember I emailed a handful of firms in Fargo here, and I still remember to this day my classmate and roommate at the time. He was like, who's gonna hire you? These guys aren't even there's not even job openings right now. Like, what are you doing reaching out to these different firms? Like, why would they hire a second year student? And I think within 2 weeks, I had a job. And I guess I think of it sometimes like sometimes you don't get what you don't ask for.
100%. I mean, you've already demonstrated a number of times already why you're a business owner. I think a lot of times what makes people successful as a business owner is, if we spend, paralysis analysis, if you think about every single thing you do before you do it,
Right.
and trust me, my wife tells me all the time, I'm sure I could be more thoughtful, but I do think that a lot of people, a lot of business owners, you just get stuff done by doing it and by trying. And to your point, asking for the sale.
Yeah.
So I think you're 100% right.
Yeah.
What are how often, just like you said, you're reaching out to builders and groups of people that you want to work with. I suspect that there are builders and remodelers in the Fargo, South Dakota, Eastern Montana, area that see your work and want to do the same. How do you handle it? When builders reach out or to you and say, "Hey, we'd love to, be referred." If you get the work, directly, Jackson, how do we get either on your bid list, or how do we get considered, to be someone that you would recommend to your clients? How do you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably pretty similar how, the other way around. It's like, we have the conversation, you kind of develop that relationship, you're seeing what kind of work they're doing. And then it's just kind of wait and see until you get a project in that area, really. And then once and if you do get that project, it's like, oh, well, we know of three builders that would probably be a pretty good fit for this. And let's get in contact with them and to see what their schedule looks like and what their process looks like. And um, so like you said, it's more of a long-term play, but yeah, we're probably handling it just like
Yeah.
builders are handling it when we're reaching out to them.
If you
Hopefully.
were to if you were to do if you had 10 jobs going right now, how many of those jobs were a client came to you directly, versus how of that 10, how many were brought to you by a builder that was already had the client, or a designer, or some other way?
I'd say I'd say a quarter to a half were brought to us, maybe even half from a builder. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's probably to piggyback on that, Mark. Even I think you asked me earlier about, yeah, you did ask me earlier about building, architects building. And that's also another reason why it's just never been on our radar, because we get so much referrals, from other builders in the area. And the minute, we decide we're going to be a builder, those
That's
referrals
very
aren't coming anymore. All of a sudden we're competition.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, you're
Uh,
right. I mean, I can answer the question that we talked about a few minutes ago personally, and maybe I'm wrong. I think actually, if I was looking at this objectively, I am wrong. But like, I've chosen, I would say, 40% of the builders in my peer group or in my strata have designers in house. Maybe not that high, 30%.
Okay.
And I understand why they do it. Communication is great. You're in office, they're always there.
Mhm.
I think, obviously, like employees, a company can make money on their people. So if you're paying someone, $70 an hour, $80 an hour, whatever it is, you're obviously going to charge the client, a multiple on that. So you can make money on your employees, no different than if you had trimmers in house or whatnot. I've chosen not to do that because I maybe it's the variety. I like working with different people, and just like the architecture side of it, I think that there are different interior designers that have different temperaments and different styles, and I
Mhm.
didn't want to be locked into one. So that if I had a client who wanted to do something that was perceived very contemporary or very modern, and let's say I had an interior designer and all she did is cottage style or traditional homes, would that be a way that I might lose a job? Now, never mind that we know that that designer in this example is probably skilled to do both. I think the same is true of builders. Sometimes a builder gets known for building only one kind of home,
Yeah.
and until someone tries them, it doesn't mean that they can't. It's just that that's not what they're known for. In fact, a
Mhm.
few years ago, we just because it seems like in Minnesota, I can't even say my own adjective here, but Minnesotans tend to be pretty conservative, and so the predominant architecture style is some variant of traditional. But I personally really wanted to do a more modern home. And we had a client that did an extremely contemporary home. The whole thing was a big giant metal box. It was awesome.
Mhm.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it was super hard and I learned a ton.
Yeah.
But the whole point of it is like now that cannot be a barrier for any future client because it's on our website. It's very prominent in our marketing. I want
Right.
people to know that we can do complex things. And just because we had never done it before doesn't mean we couldn't. And sometimes you just need someone to believe in you to do it. And I think that's
Mhm.
true of architecture. I think that's true in interior designer. Frankly, I think it's true in almost any aspect that
Yeah.
most people are pretty competent. And if they have the figure it out factor, you can kind of do whatever. But it is nice to have a range of homes within your. And some people, like I've interviewed other architects, and their style is predominantly modern, and
Mhm.
they basically say, we don't really want to do traditional, and
Mhm.
so we'll just refer to another architect, or we'll just politely pass. And so you're, kind of that concept of your vibe attracts your tribe. I mean, if you continually market the things that you want, those are the things that you're going to get. Or if you sort of show a breadth of range, you kind of let people know that, hey, I'm kind of open to everything.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and two things to that, Mark. I was going to say, one thing that you said that jogged my memory was, people, once you've done something once, people can kind of, piggyback off that, and trust that you're able to do something like that. And I think back to when we first started. I think a few of those side projects we did, especially that modern one on this lake in South Dakota, that really, helped propel that. And then, so there's one thing, and then the other thing you mentioned as far as like doing the modern or the traditional, sometimes you kind of get pigeonholed into one or the other. I always find it surprising. I don't know if it maybe sounds like it's opposite for you guys, but I've found that most time when clients see us or even a builder that we're potentially going to work with do a modern project, it's like that modern project like sticks in their head. They kind of glaze over the traditional stuff you've been doing, and they're like, well, you guys kind of do the modern stuff, right? It's like, well, all these other homes we're doing are traditional, but they remember the modern one. And I noticed they've even said that about different builders we work with. They're like, well, don't they kind of just do the modern ones? And I'm like, if you look on their website, there's all across the board, but I don't know if the modern ones are more memorable or just kind of, but I don't know if you've
I
experienced that at all.
No, I definitely have, and I think I heard something that was really interesting. It changed how I think I'm gonna market in the future. Usually, well, 2 things about that. One, I love branding. So whether it's branding on your website, your hats, your shirt, your email. I mean, branding can go really deep. It also really informs your story. And, someone had once mentioned, and I think it's very accurate, that we should be marketing and we should be branding the company we want to be, not the
Yeah.
company we used to be.
Hmm.
And, if you're, and sometimes it happens organically, we become a client, look at, you said you've been in business for 7 years.
5.
5 years. If you
Hmm.
look back at the beginning, I have to imagine you've changed pretty radically even in 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe not in, like, your skill set, which probably has improved as well, but for
Hmm.
sure would be your competency, your confidence, the projects you've taken on. And so, like, making sure that you're informing and just like building and an architect's, whatever you're designing now is probably not going to get photographed or videoed for 2 years from now.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so you're constantly in this leg pattern that,
Yep.
you as a person might evolve past what the public knows you to be. And
Hmm.
so I think that's where, like, Instagram can really help, because you're giving people more of a pulse of what's happening in the day and now, where your website and portfolio seems to be more of like your accomplished works. But if I was to look on my website, the two most prominent homes I have up there, I built 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's mainly just being aware of it. I don't really have a value statement on that, just to be, I guess, as people listening, make sure you're aware of the brand and the messaging that you are sending out to, the public. And if you want it to change, obviously you need to make sure you're aware of what change you want them to be aware of, whether
Yeah.
it's a bigger home, smaller home, niche home, whatever it might be. This episode is brought to you by Helmuth and Johnson, a top Minnesota law firm ranging from individuals to emerging startups to multinational Fortune 500 companies. Focusing on transactional law, litigation, and appeals, Helmuth and Johnson attorneys are leaders in their field. David Helmuth and Chad Johnson joined forces 30 years ago in 1994 with the goal of creating a premier law firm capable of handling complex and challenging cases efficiently and effectively. Today, Helmuth and Johnson rank among the top 15 largest law firms in Minnesota, with more than 70 Twin City lawyers serving clients in more than 30 legal practice areas. They offer a full suite of legal services to clients without sacrificing their original commitment to providing responsive and affordable legal representation. To learn more, go to their website, www.hjlawfirm.com. This episode is brought to you by Pella Northland. For 19.5 years, I've been building homes, and 95% of all of my homes have used Pella windows. I couldn't be happier to call them a partner in our builds and our remodels. Whether you're an architect, a designer, or a remodeler, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. They can fit old homes, new homes, reclaimed, commercial, and really everything in between. Pella is a company that we trust and that we recommend to our clients. Additionally, in management, Peter and Ed have just been absolute fantastic people to work with, as well as mentors to me personally. So when it comes time to look for a window, I'd highly recommend Pella windows. Find more at pellanorthland.com. Also, if you're interested, you can hear episode 1, where I interview Peter and Ed together, for a great listen on business and Pella windows.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something we've tried to kind of, I mean, it's a continual process, but we're, every day trying to hone in a little bit on what that really means. Cause I think even like social media, for quite a while there, we'd be posting something every day. And then, I take a step back and, it's like you said, as far as like marketing where you want to be at per se, and I don't know if sometimes when we were posting every day, it's like, we were just kind of filling in some gaps sometimes. Sometimes it's like, I don't know if that really needed to be posted. So we're continually trying to kind of hone in on what that wants to look like. But I 100% agree.
Yeah, and I think there's value in niching too. I mean, I'm thinking of, like, Charles Stinson, who's a, very well known,
Yep.
architect. His office is near mine, and, like, his prairie style modern homes are just, I mean, that's what he does, and he
Hmm.
does it extremely well all over the country, all over the world. And I think I have too much ADHD to niche on one specific thing. I think I like variety, and so
Hmm.
I like the challenge. Oh, one thing I was going to mention about what this architect brought up is, when you put an ad in a magazine, I asked this architect, what is it that when he looks at an ad, does he make a judgment on that company? Like, you can sort of see the images sometimes that people choose to use as their brand. I mean, they obviously chose it. And
Yep.
I get, sometimes, like most people, you're running against a deadline. Oh, that image is fine. But remember, this is going to be seen by a lot of people. And to your earlier point, if somebody sees a house that's ugly, or they perceive as a certain thing, like, that's going to be how they remember you. So make sure whatever you publish, especially in print, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
it seems like that's more sticky. Like, make sure it represents what you want. And anyway, there was this really, really complicated home. I didn't particularly think it was attractive. And this architect just said, I really appreciate this photo because I understand how complex that is.
Hmm.
And he said, I don't need to know a lot more about that builder other than to know that if they can pull off that style of home, if they can pull up that detail, then
Hmm.
I know all the other things that had to happen to have it. So I would reach out to them if I had the right project. So it was basically you were demonstrating your skill through a
Yeah.
picture. And I don't think like that. I mean, I look at like from a more branding marketing point, I'm like, ooh, that's
Yeah.
a beautiful photo. Like, how does it make me feel? I probably view ads more like a client would, where I'm
Yep.
like, ooh, that's visually very appealing, or ooh, I like the type font, or I like the coloring, or
Yeah.
that photo is drawing me in. I'm not making a judgment on which one is right or wrong. I just thought it was really interesting to hear his perspective as as a builder who wants to work with more architects and higher end architects, just because I'm interested in higher end projects.
Yeah.
This high end architect was really appreciative of a photo that really demonstrated competency. Anyway,
Hmm.
just I guess my question now in this long soliloquy I just had is, when you look at photos, what do you look at? What do you look for?
I probably wired a little bit more like yourself, Mark. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
looking at the whole composition. I mean, obviously, you're looking at the details of the home or whatever the project may be, and kind of taking in the proportions, the scale, the materials. But I'm also wired like you in the sense that, hey, what's this logo look like? Well, how much white space
yeah,
is on here? What how is this composed? Like, and then if you're seeing things that this doesn't it catches your eye, it doesn't look quite right. You're kind of like, what? Why does that look that way, or what makes this better or worse than this ad I really like over here? I think at my first firm I did a lot of marketing stuff, so I got big into like brochures and just layouts and all these things, kind of studying what made a certain ad look better than the next. And I haven't I'm by no means a pro in that, but I've done some digging on that over the years, so I'd like to think I'm maybe a little bit more well versed than some. But
yeah. No, that's interesting. We're gonna have them on the podcast at some point, so I'll have to ask him that question. I think just people are wired differently. That was something that that he was interested in. Let's talk a little bit about business, just because most of the people listening are business owners or interested in business, and I what are in some ways all business is sort of the same. I've often made the argument that probably 70% of all businesses, you hire, fire, market, P&Ls, accounting, blah blah blah, blah, that's all the same. But so I guess I'd be kind of curious, to know some of the differentiation. But like, how does an architecture business operate? And I guess more specifically, I'm thinking of like, when I build a home, let's say my home takes a year, and
mhm,
for this example, let's just say it's $2 million, and you get a couple $100,000 up front, and then you're billing monthly against the project, some of your overhead, and of course your project management and everything is, so you're taking portions of your profit through the build. And I
mhm,
didn't always do that. I used to just kind of operate, and then I would get all my money at the end. But as we become more sophisticated and knowledgeable and the homes have gotten bigger, obviously we're taking a portion off the table every month, which is what you should do.
yeah.
Um, but I would say, we're basically kind of in time with the project. Rather than me stating what I think architecture is like, walk us through a little bit about the cash flow management of running an architecture business, because I have to believe it's pretty front loaded.
Yeah, yeah, and I'd say that's probably how we do things a little bit different than some of our competition, Mark. I know a lot of firms do hourly billing. We've had really good luck. Our clients, at least our clients so far, have preferred really more of a fixed fee. So I think a lot of times when we're competing with another architect, that's usually something that at least I've experienced, that it kind of catches the client's ear of like, they may be looking at a bigger number up front from us, but I think our clients so far have preferred knowing what that number is going to be in the end. So I'd like to say that's something a little bit different of our firm. That's not foolproof either, though, because there's revisions and updates, and it's a bit of it can be a bit of a bell curve, because like if you are really good at what you do and can manage the project well, that can go really well for the firm. But if things start to get off track, that's when towards the end of the project, you're looking at the amount of hours you put into it, and you're starting to say, this didn't end up as good as we thought it was in the beginning. But I've just found that a lot of clients like that up front, the idea that it's a fixed fee versus the hourly. So I'd say that's probably something a little bit different of our firm. Now there are some projects where we will do hourly, but kind of few and far between.
How do you, out of curiosity, how do you arrive at a fixed number? I mean, I get why, it's a little bit analogous to a fixed fee model for building a home versus
Yeah.
a cost plus model. I mean, it's the same thing, hourly versus, fixed, but there's got to be some way that you're actually coming up with that. I assume experience, I mean, do you do like square? Some people I've heard, do square footage, which is kind of an interesting way to do it. But how do you even arrive at what you're going to charge somebody?
Yeah, so we start out with having the client fill out a online design survey, and we get an idea what they're looking to invest in this project up front as well. So between those two things, we're looking at past projects that we've done with a similar program and the amount of time that we've put into those projects, and then of course adding a percentage for just the unknowns per se.
Yep.
So again, you're looking at a larger number up front, but our clients so far have really liked just to see that number and know that that number is not going to fluctuate as the project goes on. Because I guess when I say fixed fee, it's not even necessarily based on that end project number. It's it again is kind of, now keep in mind, if the project doubles in budget, let's say, well then we need to have another conversation. But if it just rises, a smaller percentage, our number is not fluctuating. And I will say, like, I don't know if we've ever, maybe once, had a conversation regarding, like, revising our billing. But
Mhm. How do you handle, in just cash flow management? For instance, how many jobs do you sort of have to have going at any one time to sort of keep the lights on and pay for everyone's salaries?
yeah, we're always juggling, so I say at any one time, um 20 projects maybe.
Oh, wow, that's a lot of projects.
But now keep in mind, Mark, that some of those, we're trying to condense that number, but some of those are, well, a past client referred their friend. They want a front porch edition. We're doing one of those right now. So um, maybe there's other projects where the client is just sitting on the design for a while. So we're able to
I
pick up
see.
another project. So um, I will say we're trying
Basically
to.
20, so basically 20 open projects at various stages, because they could be beginning and punch, construction administration. I mean, they could be all segments here.
Exactly. I'd say projects that are pretty hot and heavy, maybe 5 at
Yep.
every given time. Um, but yeah, there's probably 20 on that list that are, being juggled, but they're all at different phases. You're right. Yeah.
Well, how do you, and I don't know how many, I assume you're the principal of your, do you have any other principal architects in your firm?
No, it's
How
myself.
does, so walk me through that. I don't know the answer to this question of, so you have a firm, I think, what, 7 people? Is that how big your team is?
Yep.
And walk us through, you meet with somebody, I assume you're meeting with the builder and the client from
Yep.
the point that they tell you, hey, we want a 5,000 square foot house. Our budget is, 2 million or 3 million, whatever. They tell you the things that they want. They show you some pictures, visual listening, all that. Let's skip all that. Let's go to the back end. So you are now at the drafting table with your team. who
Mhm.
who who does what? It seems like every architecture firm is a little bit different. They have junior associates. Some people are kind of doing blocking and tackling. Some are doing, just approvals, and their team is drawing it and they sort of tweak it. Walk
Mhm.
us through sort of your, I guess we might as well just talk about your firm's practice, and you can comment on if that's normal or not normal compared to the rest of the architecture field.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So our firm, old school in the sense that once we get that, all those inspiration images, the design survey, the notes. Well, first of all, majority of time in the meetings, I'm ended up sketching the house plan in front of the client. So by the end of that initial meeting, we have a pretty good roadmap of where we're heading. So rather than myself or whoever going back to the drawing board and kind of crossing their fingers that the client's kind of thinking this or that, we're able to kind of get in real time feedback what they're thinking, as we're drawing it in front of them. So from there, how our team does it is I actually end up hand drafting the floor plan. So literally have a drafting table that I use, a lead holder and everything, draft it up to scale, and that's kind of how we start the process. And then somebody else, one of our other team members is doing the 3D modeling. Of course, when we're drafting it, we have an idea of how these forms are coming together, but I'm the one doing the drafting, and then the team kind of takes it from there, and then we get it into CAD and we finesse it from there. But that's kind of the first step, is I'm ended up drafting it myself.
Okay.
Hmm.
And is that, would you say, compared to other architect firms your size, that seems to be a fairly similar path, or is everyone super unique and everyone has different talents? So maybe their members do different things.
I'd say a lot of the aspects are probably very similar, but I mean, I don't know if there's a ton of different firms that are, well, I shouldn't say that. I know of other firms that are doing hand drafting. It's funny whenever I talk to a commercial architect, or yeah, I'd say commercial architect, it's like they're really surprised that we're doing anything by hand. But there's just something about that, and kind of feeling that plan out, and just by hand, that I don't know, just feels right to me. But
Well, and also given your background, you said, you were an artist before you became sort of interested in home architects, right? And so it's like there's got
yeah,
to be
right.
something satisfying about drawing. I have
Yeah,
terrible penmanship and I'm an awful artist, but I'm a very good critic, very good critic.
yeah,
And so anyway, I do have appreciation for, I've worked with several architects that can draw right in front of you, and it's a very special talent. There's not that many that can do that. So I would say that not only do you get the wow effect, but I imagine that it's also extremely helpful, besides just amazing sales tool that you could leverage, but
yeah.
you're getting instantaneous feedback loop with your client. Like if you see them just like lean, like, whoa, like their facial expressions, you can kind of look up, and I assume you're watching their reactions when you're
Yeah.
drawing.
Yep. And
Yeah.
then with that, there's sometimes where they're like, "Oh, we definitely wouldn't want that." And it's like, "Oh, well, I'm glad we're sketching this in front of you right now, because we maybe would have done that otherwise."
Right. Yeah.
So
I definitely appreciate the iterations that architects go through behind the scenes, that, they put a lot of time. I feel like, especially in the digital age, I have clients. We just met someone recently, a delightful couple. We're going to build for them, and they're just super nice people. But when you don't do this for a living, you don't always know. And I'm sort of like an armchair quarterback to architecture. Like I know a lot of time and thought goes into it. And anyway, the real estate agent was sitting down with us, and they're like, "Oh, can you come up with some floor plans and a few elevations by Friday?" And I was just like, Man, they have no idea what they just asked this architect to
yeah,
do." And like, we really want to sell, and he's gonna. I mean, he probably's gonna have to drop everything he's gonna do. He's gonna have to work nights and crazy deals, and and I don't usually answer for them, because I've learned sort of long ago, don't answer for them, let them answer their own schedule. And he said,
yeah,
I'll do my best, which is very open ended, but um I feel like when you don't understand how much time, and the other thing too is if you rush the process, the client, going back to our marketing comment, like they're going to judge you on your architecture when it's
right,
not done. I mean, if you don't give someone the amount of time that they need to really create something unique and special,
yeah,
um, then you're also holding. It's like you say, "Oh, we're not going to hold you to a higher standard," and then you deliver it, and then they hold you to a higher standard. You're like,
right.
man, it's not a fair statement. It's not,
Mhm.
and I don't think they even realize it. And then that's where I would say, as a builder, I have to sort of step in as a moderator and just kind of, sort of, I think that's what you ultimately pay. I think that's what you pay for when you get experience, how to
Mhm.
navigate that, how to educate the client, it's all kind of this nuanced sales process. I don't know how you would even write a book or like really describe that. It's more of a
Yeah,
feeling, right? And
yeah,
maybe in that room, you're saying, hey, oh, huge shout out to Jackson. I mean, I cannot believe he was able to do this in such a short time frame. I mean, that's crazy. Don't get your hopes up. And then, if it turns out great, you're like, you're the Dalai Lama. And if it
right.
doesn't turn out great, you're like, well, you asked him to do this in 4 days. Like it's pretty amazing. And also those classic lines of, we're looking for a reaction, and I'm okay. And I'm honest about this. Like I'm okay with a negative reaction. The only
Yep,
thing I'm not okay with is no reaction, because I can't do anything with no
uh-huh,
reaction. Do
yep.
you find that's true too?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we've dealt with everything you just described. And I would say too, like as far as that timeline story goes, I mean, I feel like you end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot. At least we have in the past with situations like that too, because and don't get me wrong, we've pumped stuff out in certain time limits, which we're still very happy with. But I think sometimes from the clients, and they say, "Oh, well, geez, that went so fast," or especially even when it comes to like renderings and stuff, like, "Oh, well, don't you guys just press a few buttons and that's like it just kind of pops out?" And it's like, well, no. But I think sometimes when you're kind of giving you're producing stuff in a certain, tight timeline. I think clients have it in their head that that's just a kind of an easy task for you. In reality, behind the scenes, you're kind of frantically, getting it all put together, and it's maybe a little bit of a stressful situation. But
Right.
um, I know my first boss would say that. And of course, that was when like Google SketchUp was still probably pretty new when I was practicing with him. But I know he would say like, never pull up the model and like alter things in front of the client, because that will give them the perception that it's just very easy. And I've
Interesting.
heard that since then. I've heard clients say like, oh, when you guys are doing the modeling, it's just like playing a video game or something. And it's like, well,
It's
kind
actually,
of.
I can see there's a lot of merit in that advice. I think a lot of it depends on reading the room and who the client is, but I think that, I think that's could be a very accurate statement.
Yep, exactly.
Interesting. How, you'd mentioned just just like a click of a button. Where do you're one of the younger architects I've had on the podcast so far. Where do you see, there's a lot of chat, pun intended, about AI.
Mhm.
What do you hear in NDSU? Just because you're getting so many young students and
Yeah.
maybe your own personal experience with this, but where do you see AI helping architecture and helping builders on the design side, and how far and how fast do you think the technology will be there to sort of aid you or direct you? Or, I mean, I think people fear what they don't know. So I'm not going to go so far as to say like you're gonna be able to, but I mean, the most of the AI stuff is language based, but I have to imagine at some point, someone had mentioned that architecture has a lot of math principles and
Mhm.
computers do math extremely well.
Yeah.
Could you describe to some sort of a program like, hey, I want a 5,000 square foot house, and give it some parameters it can go. I don't know what it could do with sort of style and nuance and those types of things. But
Mhm.
I assume, at least from blocking out and like for some initial grunt work, I imagine it would probably be pretty helpful. What's your
Yeah.
thoughts on the whole field?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Mark. I mean, I think I view it as a potentially a supplemental thing. Chat GPT, that's totally different a little bit. But I know that in our office, there has been discussion on using AI for, what can it do for renderings? What can it do for modeling? And we've played with it a little bit. Some of our younger team members have. And it is pretty wild what it can do, but I think it's still early. Of course, I don't know, in a year, maybe it's, finessed by then, but it's still, from what I've seen, and just like, at quick glance, but it's still a little choppy. But I definitely think that there is, I'm sure it will be utilized, and it'll continue to get more and more finessed. And I'll just have to retire early or something. I don't know.
Yeah, perfect. You can just have a bot do it. So
Yeah, yeah. Strom AI.
what, let's talk a little bit going back to the business side of things. You hear a lot, at least on the builder side of things, and I don't think homeowners know much about it, but construction administration, or CA.
Yep.
And I think a lot of, I suspect this is true in North Dakota because it's true in Minnesota. So I'm guessing it's true there too. But you get different educated buyers. I love working with someone who's built a home before or appreciates architecture, because you don't really have to resell them on why we're paying Jackson or XYZ firm to do our work, because they see the value in it,
Yep.
because they've seen it before. Sometimes when people haven't gone through the architecture route, they like a home, but because they've never seen the sausage get made before, they don't really appreciate all the various parts that go in it. And they
Mhm.
might they might even be okay with your fee on the front end, and they might do a big gulp. Every architecture, firm, regardless of your price point, they're like, oh man, this design costs more than I thought it was, and you
Yep.
have to go through the value propositions and why this, that, and another thing.
Yep.
Where I'm going with this is, a lot of times you'll get someone, I'd say half the people want to stop once we bid it out and we have the permit set. And then the client will say to me, well, Mark, I'm paying you. You're the general contractor. You should know how to build a house. And they're not wrong. I do know how to build a house.
Yeah.
But they're sort of trying to break up the team.
Mhm.
Can you speak a little bit, rather than me just talking this whole time, about the value of CA and how you've responded to that question when, clients have the builder and the architect in the room, and they're maybe looking at you and saying, Jackson, we don't need you anymore to do, the construction administration.
Yeah.
Because walk us through how you navigate that and what you tell people and how you educate them. Because I think it's a really valuable thing that both builders need to get better educated on, myself included, as well as for certain, um, the clients.
Yeah. Well, and I think you said a mouthful as far as having the builder and the architect in the room at the same time when that's being discussed. Um, I think touring different projects could help kind of tell the story a lot. I think in our experience, we kind of have three buckets of clients. One client, one bucket, they don't want, like you said, after it's bid out and construction starts, they don't want to borderline see the architect again. Like, we're done paying you. We have another bucket. The client says, we want you from start to finish. We want you there all throughout construction. And that's just what we envision. We want the best product that, we can. And then we probably have the third where, kind of like what you said, they're open to having you involved during CA, but they're slightly confused why you need to be involved, because they're kind of saying, well, isn't the stuff the builder does? Or, and even to the point where and I'm sure that's kind of what you were getting at too, where there's almost a little bit of frustration, like, well, geez, I just paid this architect a bunch of money and I'm paying you a bunch of money, and why do I need to pay this architect more now, because I thought everything was figured out. And I think it's just a continual just having to educate the client all the way through, because I think that's the biggest challenge in our profession, is just the education of kind of the whole process and what we do and what you guys do and how you really make these projects that really sing in the end. Because I think for our clientele, a lot of them see certain projects in magazines or online and say, hey, we want that, but we don't necessarily want it to cost that much. And we don't really want to pay you as much as that architect got paid on that project, or that builder, got paid. So it's just kind of educating the client to, in a sense of like proving your value. Like, what are you bringing to the table and why are you making this project and this experience that much better? I think that kind of went on a tangent there, Mark, but
No, I mean, I think it comes down to education and
yeah,
communication. I think,
yeah,
and this is true of the builder, and because I would be fine, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing you would be too, if we all had an equal part to explain our point of view on this client's home, me as
yeah.
the builder, you as the architect, and then the client can make an informed decision on what they want.
Hmm.
It's their home. We're building it for them. And if that's really what they want, that's fine. We will do that. I think so often they make a decision without understanding it all. And I heard something recently that if people think your price is too high, your value statement is too short. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that, but I think what that really, the root of that quote is that, you haven't effectively communicated, what it is that you do and the value that you bring. And it's
Yeah.
okay if someone's value system doesn't line up with yours. That's okay.
Hmm.
It took me a long time to realize that in business that, I am not I don't view myself as a commodity. I want to be in the relationship game, and we have a tremendous value. But if you don't value the things that I value, that's okay. I'm just not for you. And that's okay.
Hmm.
And I wish I wish I understood that at a younger age. Sure would have made chasing jobs that you didn't need to chase a lot easier. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, it applies to anything. Would it it could have applied to chasing girlfriends instead of chasing your wife. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
like, hey, wait, I have more to tell you. I'm really a lot cooler than you've been led to believe. Uh, so
Yeah.
we didn't realize this was going to turn into a dating podcast for those
Yeah.
out there, but lessons learned from Jackson and Mark.
Right. Yeah.
Episode 2. Yeah,
Well,
but
I don't know if one thing I was going to add to that too, Mark, is one thing I've experienced too is, and I don't know if you've felt this way, but I also feel like once the project gets to a certain point, the client is there's much more weight on what the builder is saying. So every once in a while we have a builder, it's like, oh, you don't need the architect past this point. And the
Mhm.
client is saying, okay, well, that's what the builder says. Like, that sounds fine with us. Versus there's other times where the builder says, we need this architect involved throughout this process. And then most times the client says, okay, so I don't know if you've ever felt that way or,
Oh, yeah, I know that the client is looking for that. I would never say that. I mean,
yeah.
maybe early on in my career before I understood it or before I understood the value, I could see myself doing that, but I would never do that. I'd say in the last 7, 8 years, I would never have said that.
Yeah.
I really look at it because I do get asked that question a lot because at least in Minnesota, I know having interviewed people around the country, in certain parts of the country, the architect is the first point of contact. And so then they're bringing in the builder.
Yeah.
And in some places, it's the interior designer, and then they assemble the team. In Minnesota, we have extremely strong, you know, um, hold on the public's imagination from the Parade of Homes for 75 years and our Builders Association. So predominantly people are coming to builders first, which is great for me. And it
Mhm.
just is what it is. I don't think there's a right or a wrong. I
Yeah.
think the real right is just making sure you assemble the entire team. I mean, right now we're working on a project where, we have some land. And so, we'll interview, an architect or two, depending on, their vibe. And sometimes I just know like this is just the designer and the architect for them. And,
Yeah.
if there's an issue, then I'll bring in, 1B or plan B. But,
Yeah.
why rock the boat if, a lot of times as the professional, they're looking to you. But
Right.
that shoe can be flipped on the other side. If they're coming to the architect first and let's say I'm the builder trying to get some of the work and I'd really like to be considered. And the architect's like, yeah, I just don't think you're the guy.
Yeah.
You just might not be the guy for that client. Or
Right.
you might not, or the hard part is you also might not be the guy for that architect. And
Mhm.
they're usually not going to tell you which one it is, which makes it, again, going back to confusion, you don't know where you stand. And so again, it's creating a relationship that goes both ways where you can just be honest and, very transparent with the person that you're speaking with, whether it's the client or your trade partner. Because at
Mhm.
the end of the day, we all benefit when we have clear communication.
Yeah. No, that's 100% right. That's 100% right.
Well, we are just past an hour here, so I want to respect your time.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners find you if they're a builder and they want to reach out to have you do some architecture, or if fellow architects or designers just want to talk shop and reach out to you? What are your best platforms?
Yeah. Our website's stromarch.com. And then social media is just at Stromarch. So ARCH. And yeah, you can find most everything about us on either one of those.
It just dawned on me. Are you related at all to Chris Strom?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there's a well-known architect here in Minneapolis, Christopher Strom, which I'm sure you've probably been asked that question before. It just dawned on me right now.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't think there's any, I don't have any relatives in Minneapolis area right at the
Okay.
moment. Yeah.
Okay. Well, well, very good. Thanks again for coming on the Curious Builder podcast. And if you like what you've listened to, please give us a like, a follow, and give us a review. And feel free to share with your friends and family or other business owners. We appreciate those that are listening. Thanks again for coming on. We are happy to announce that we have a one-to-one coaching session that can be found on our Curious Builder podcast platform. So you can book a time with me and it'll be 1 hour to ask any sort of questions that you want, talk about business, talk about life, talk about scheduling. Maybe you're dealing with a difficult client and you just want to maybe shop with another builder and say, hey, how do I handle this? Or maybe you're looking to rebrand your company. Whatever it might be, you can head to our website and book a time, and I'd be happy to sit down and give you that hour, and we can talk about whatever's on your mind. We're excited to announce that we have partnered with Harnish Workwear. They're an amazing shirt company. I'm actually wearing it right now if you're on YouTube. Softest shirt I've ever had. Also the most durable. There's a reason these guys make shirts for workwear. If you head to our Curious Builder webpage under the merch channel, you'll see we have a limited time only of our pre-launch of the Curious Builder shirt. We also have our new monogram that's going to be on the back with a cool little custom tag. If you want to support the show, if you want to support what you're listening and small businesses, both for Harnish as well as the Curious Builder, please go there, buy a shirt, buy two, give one to one of your colleagues, maybe one of the tradesmen that you think might like the show, and you're supporting a small business and you're supporting this podcast. So I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the Curious Builder podcast. If you like what you listen to, please give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It really means a lot. It's a great way for us to just understand what you like about the podcast and what we can keep doing. So like and review, and please share with your friends and family. Find out more at curiousbuilderpodcast.com.